I'm Paul Heavenridge. I'm the Executive Director of Literacy Works. And welcome to the last lecture series for Literacy Works lectures. Last lecture speaker series for the Literacy Works lecture series of 2017. We had a great year, and I want to say a word right off the bat for next year. We have a collaboration with Copperfield's Books, and we're calling it Literacy Works and Copperfield's Books Presents. And we have a couple speakers lined up already. One is Steven Pinker, March 3rd, and we have Michael Krasny in conversation with Isabel Allende, which will be really great. And we have some other surprises coming up, but I shouldn't talk about it quite yet. So stay tuned for our new 2018 series coming up. And you can find all the information about it at literacyworks.org. I think we have that right up here. So before we begin, I just want to say a word about Literacy Works. And for those who don't know, Literacy Works is a national nonprofit. We've been around since 2000, and we work with adults with low literacy issues, and also their families, and also their kids. And presently, the Literacy Works Center, which we have here at the Petaluma campus, we serve students throughout Sonoma and Marin, and what we do is make sure they stay in college. So these are individuals that we get referred from our partners, and we also get students from the Santa Rosa JC that really need our help to stay in school. Their low literacy rates are around 8th grade level or lower, and traditionally most of the students that have that grade level will drop out of college. And we have a 10% success rate, or below 10%, of keeping everybody in school. So it's very successful. Below 10%, dropout rate. Yeah, sorry. Yeah, that would be terrible, wouldn't it? Yeah. Okay, well, I was going to tell you, 60% of the students that we work with will drop out the first year of going to the Santa Rosa JC, but we have less than a 10% dropout rate. There, thank you. Okay? How can I blow that? I say that all the time. But anyway, so we really want to thank our wonderful donors that have made the program possible, and you can see them on the back of the program. And also the friends of the Literacy Works Center that make this all happen, and also our Literacy Works staff and our board of directors, and all of you coming, because this is a fundraiser, and I'm gonna take some of that money and go and take speaking lessons, I guess. I don't know. No, I'm kidding. So a little shameless plug out here. We do have a donation jar out there, and this is a fundraiser, but we thank you all for coming. So I would like to introduce you to Chris Schultz, who's our director of the Literacy Works Center, and he's going to introduce our student.
Thank you so much for coming. Before I introduce our wonderful student speaker, I'd like to say a few things about the center. Now that we're well into our third year of working with students, it becomes vividly clear to me that lives change with relatively little effort. It's helping walk across the street, a call, being responsible. We have 90 students this current semester. They range from taking one non-credit course to taking almost a full load, but reading below college level. Each of our students has a story, but their lives are more than stories. But I'll give you just a couple of them. Rita, our associate, and I were doing a workshop in Santa Rosa a couple weeks ago with a group, and the impact of the fires were profound. 2 weeks of income lost for a husband and wife took a toll. But to try and put a positive spin, we started doing career development and talking about the dreams of what we're going to do when we grow up. many of the people in the room are well grown up. So one folk talked about becoming a nurse, another one a sociologist or a social worker so that she could give back to her community. And the last speaker had a little 3 or 4-year-old with her, and she said, I want to turn my house into a child care center. I want to take early childhood classes. And Rita and she walked out when it was over, and she told Rita that her house burned down to the ground. The stories are rich and selfless efforts, and I feel privileged to be able to participate with these people. They are an inspiration. And I would like Raquel to come. She's been with the program for a year. She has a remarkable story. So I'd like her to.
Good afternoon, everybody. In our lives, all of us have dreams and goals that we want to fulfill. That is the reason why we wake up every day and face life challenges. My name is Raquel Choto. I am from El Salvador, and I am a student of the English as a Second Language program here at the Santa Rosa Junior College. I am also one of the beneficiaries of the Literacy Works program. My experience as a student here at the college and with the Literacy Works program has exceeded all my expectations. These types of programs not only contribute to the development of the community, but also makes the financial capacity of a person not be an impediment to access education. I am very grateful for the support I have been receiving, principally from Chris and Rita of the Literacy Works program. For 2 years, I have been here in this country. My priority has been to learn the language, and without your help, I would not have been able to continue my English studies. My goal is to be fluent in English in order to be able to take the bar exam. I am a lawyer in my country, but due to the difficult situation that El Salvador is going through, on December 2015, I decided to leave my country. My father is an American citizen, so I had the opportunity to immigrate here legally. And I decided to start a new life here in the United States. I was born in El Salvador in the year that the Civil War started. The war lasted 12 years. As a result of it, and many other reasons, today, El Salvador is going through some of the saddest times in its history, plunged into corruption and with crime totally out of control. Living my life, my family, and my profession has been one of the most difficult decisions that I have ever made in my life. But I decided to take the risk because I want to know how it is to live without fear. Living in peace and freedom is priceless. It is something that I have never experienced before. Starting over is not easy. The life of an immigrant is really difficult. It is full of challenges, and I will always be grateful for your help. Thank you very much.
I am Lynn Woolsey, and I have the honor this afternoon of introducing Ambassador Eliot and our moderator, Dr. Donna Brasset-Shearer. This is a real honor for me. When I was your congresswoman, Ambassador Eliot would reach out to my offices. I mean, after all, I was his congresswoman, I believe. And if not, I was very close to where he lived in Sonoma. And he would fill me and my offices, those who were responsible for foreign affairs, fill us in on what was going on, what wasn't going on, and where things stood. And he did this for 20 years about with us. And if we had a need, we would get a hold of him. I remember Wendy Freifeld, she's here somewhere. Where are you, Wendy? There she is. Would say, we need to talk to Ted Eliot about that. And somebody in the office would get a hold of him, and we knew we could trust what we were told. And that was because he was local, not loco, local. And we knew he was an expert, and he had the wisdom and expertise, and he had the willingness to go out of his way to outreach to us and make things clearer, because even back then, things weren't very clear in the international world. But today we have two people who have been following international affairs in one way or another for their entire careers. And I have the honor of, first, I'm going to introduce our moderator, Dr. Donna Brasset-Shearer has told me that when you are introducing a moderator, that all you say today about her is that Dr. Donna Brasset-Shearer is a Berkeley-educated California cultural anthropologist with a background in international relations. That doesn't even begin to cover that woman sitting in that chair. I mean, she's a writer, an educator, a lecturer. She follows what's going on, particularly in the areas they're going to talk about today, but really worldwide. And she shares it with us. The two of them write op-ed and close-to-home pieces for the Press Democrat. They could write one every week. The Press Democrat, of course, only lets you do a close-to-home when they decide you haven't talked too much too often. So, but they collaborate together and they work together. And it's so absolutely perfect that she's here to ask and moderate with Ambassador Eliot. And that's who we're going to really hear from today. Ambassador Ted Eliot is a Harvard-educated, retired Foreign Service officer who has served in Sri Lanka, in Germany, the Soviet Union, Iran, and Afghanistan, where he was the American ambassador for 4 years. Ted Eliot has also held ranking positions in the State Department, including Inspector General, Executive Secretary, and as Country Director of the Iran Desk. After his retirement from the State Department, he became the Dean of the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy at Tufts University. And later, as Director of the Asia Foundation Center for Asia-Pacific Affairs, a position that led to recurring visits to Afghanistan, he continued his interests and his expertise. Then he became known here at home for his involvement with his late wife, Patricia, in the nonprofit environment of keeping our county, Sonoma County, environmentally beautiful and safe, not from fires, that was beyond his control, but safe from encroachment. And he continues that today in his own name and in his own right, but also in the right of his wife, Patricia. So now it is my honor to turn this stage over to two people that we can trust who have known what was happening in the past, know what is happening right now and can tell us from their perspective what we can expect to happen or else what we need to do about it. So here you go, you guys.
You go first.
I have a Canadian background, so I insist that you go first.
I don't quite understand that. We've just heard from a wonderful woman, a person who devoted to public service all her life, and was a wonderful representative of this community in this is a wonderful person too. She has been a professor at Sonoma State University. We first got to know each other when every once in a while she'd ask me to come up and help her on a course on Afghanistan or Iran or some other place that I supposedly knew something about. And so she and I have been working, as Lynn said, for a long time. And the last thing she did for me is she made me read 2 books. And I'm going to leave these 2 books on the table because I don't want you reaching for your pencils and pads to write down the names of the author or the names of the books now. But come on up here if you are more interested in these books. One is called Destined for War by Graham Allison, who I think was the first dean of the Kennedy School at Harvard. And this is about, will we go to war someday with China? It's a very, very important book. And the other was written by former Secretary of Defense, William Perry, entitled My Journey at the Nuclear Brink. What he sees of the nuclear weapons problem today. This is a really important book. So just to start you off, there's a little bit of the dean and professor in me, so I wanted to start that way. What were you going to say? Can you do it now?
I just wanted to remind you of 2 things that you said when you came to my classes. It was always in response to some crises. And the first one was after 9/11 and our initial invasion of Afghanistan to rout the Taliban in that first round. And you told my class then that if we did attack Afghanistan, it was not going to accomplish stamping out terrorism. That was one of your messages in that particular class and that issue. Then later, it was the impending invasion of Iraq, and it looked like the United States was going in. You came to my classes and said, if we invaded Iraq, that would be a huge mistake. You said it would open a Pandora's box of furies, inter-ethnic violence and conflict that was going to create or generate remarkable instability in the entire region. That's what you said then. That was 2003. So here we are again. I don't know if it's hyperbole to call this, what's happening now, another crisis, but it feels that way to some extent. We're here to talk about domestic, but primarily foreign policy under the new Trump administration. So I think now I'm going to hand that back to you.
Thank you very much, Donna. And I do see a number of friends here, but I do want to bring to your attention one person whom I met many years ago in Kabul, although I have to confess I didn't remember her because she belonged to a very important group there. She was a Peace Corps person, a Peace Corps member of the Peace Corps in Afghanistan when I was ambassador, and she said that my wife and I gave her an awfully good Thanksgiving dinner one. Will you put your hand up wherever you are here, over there? But the Peace Corps is a wonderful institution. I think in many ways it's benefited the United States more than necessarily the countries to which the Peace Corps volunteers went, because they have learned about a foreign culture, and in this case, to be a woman Peace Corps volunteer, excuse me, in Afghanistan is no small thing to do. I also want to say, I want to tell you before I get on my main subject, that my senior thesis, excuse me, gotta do one of these. That my senior thesis at college was on the importance of having an educated electorate if you're going to have a successful democracy. And to see this organization, Literacy, doing what it is doing warms my heart. This is, and what the young student said earlier is really wonderful. And congratulations, and I hope you will at least put a few nickels into that job. So I'm going to talk to you about Mr. Trump. Now, we've all heard a lot about Mr. Trump in recent months. Foreign policy. One of the things he and his Secretary of State have apparently decided to do is to pay no attention to the State Department. This is a terrible mistake, because what you have in the State Department are a lot of Foreign Service officers who have served many years in many different countries and are there to help the decision makers in our government to reach the right decisions. And I'm shocked to see what they're doing. Many senior Foreign Service officers, having realized that they're not going to be asked their opinions, because opinions of Foreign Service officers aren't needed or wanted, they've resigned. The most difficult thing for me to stomach is that they're not taking any new Foreign Service officers in at the lowest ranks. And like the military, the Foreign Service moves you up through the ranks, and you get to senior positions after you've had a number of different jobs across in different countries and so forth. And gradually you learn what the trade of diplomacy is all about. So this is a very serious thing. I'm very glad that a lot of the media has picked this up. I don't like hearing that morale is bad in the State Department. I mean, crying out loud, they're all adults. But and I don't think morale is being destroyed. I think they are really puzzled, and they're really wondering what in the world this administration is all about by not seeming to need us anymore. So that's one thing that stands out for me. The next thing that stands out for me is in my lifetime, the United States became the superpower of the world. And we turned ourselves and we worked extremely hard to form and found organizations and institutions which would help keep the peace, which would help bring more justice into the lives of more human beings, and also a better economic situation. The United Nations, the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund, NATO, trade organizations, trade deals such as NAFTA, were bedrocks of our foreign policy. And I thought then, and I still think, that we were doing a remarkable job in trying to make the world a better place. You can forget all that now. This new president didn't even know there was a clause in the NATO pact wherein if one country is attacked by an outside country, all of NATO goes to war against the country that is invading one of the NATO countries. He didn't know that this was in a treaty, and so he wanted to get rid of NATO. He has really destroyed our efforts to increase trade, which in my opinion always increases economic growth, as in the past. One of his first decisions was to stop working on the Asian American trade treaty, which was almost at signatory level. He therefore, in effect, said to the Chinese, here, we're not interested in this, you go ahead. And sure enough, the Chinese are, of course, getting ahead. When we leave something alone that we've been working with, it becomes a vacuum. And the Russians are taking advantage of that in the Middle East, and the Chinese are certainly taking it over in many places in the world. So it has been reported that his Secretary of State called him a moron. The Secretary of State said that isn't true, but good for you, I say, Mr. Tillerson, you had it right. But this is scary. This is really scary. He's also the man who has the finger on the trigger of the nuclear bomb. We're going to have to weather this through as long as he's president. It may be he's going to be president less longer than 4 years. But certainly one of the things, I mean, Lynn was talking about what do we do next. One of the first things we try to do is to put somebody else into the White House. So that's my rather gloomy picture right now of what's going on in American foreign policy. Let me take you through some of the areas of the world that sort of stand out as being major issues right now. One with which I'm very, very familiar, of course, is Afghanistan. Strangely, this seems to be coming out all right. I'm pleased with the policy that the Trump administration has established for our relations with Afghanistan. A lot of people, and probably many of you, are thinking, we've been there so long, why are we still there? And the answer to that question is, think about what happens if we leave. And the possibility, the probability that Afghanistan would turn once again into a base for international terrorism, as it was before we went into Afghanistan, is very, very high. There would be nobody there to stop it. So what our policy is to try and get Afghanistan through this very difficult period they're in right now into a state that can take care of itself. It's not going to happen fast, and we've made mistakes. One of the reasons we shouldn't have gone into Iraq is because we pulled out from Afghanistan. And we had a chance, my wife and I were there in 2004, and it really looked to me and to my wife that Afghanistan was on the right track for the future. We pulled out our military and stuff and went to war in Iraq and forgot Afghanistan. And by the next time I was in Kabul, which was in 2010, you could see that we were back in a very, very difficult period. We happened to know very well when they were in their early 20s, the current president and his wife in Afghanistan, Ashraf and Rula Ghani. Ashraf Ghani is somebody who has just one goal in life, and that is to make his country a better country and an independent country that can stand on its own feet. Before he even ran for president, he let me see a 15-page paper he had written spelling out exactly what he wants to do if and when he becomes president, and that is what he has been doing. And as for his wife, she is one of the leaders in the world of women's empowerment organizations. What did you tell me about her the other day?
I think it was in 2010, Time magazine listed her as being among the 100 most influential women in the world.
Yeah. Well, she should be. She's a Lebanese. They got to know each other at American University in Beirut, where they both went to as undergraduates. And in fact, one of the really interesting things in their lives is that her father, a Maronite Christian, allowed his daughter to marry an Afghan Muslim. I mean, it's very unusual in that part of the world. So, and incidentally, it's interesting that they have a daughter-in-law who's now working for Elizabeth Warren's staff in Washington, D.C. So it's quite a family.
And if I might say, her daughter-in-law also has a PhD in anthropology from Berkeley.
That's a good plug. What is happening in Afghanistan today, moving forward, one has to remember that an entire generation was blotted out when the Soviets invaded and the Civil War followed that. So there's a whole generation of people who are not educated. Now we're beginning to see the next generation come into the government and come into business and other areas in the Afghan economy. Young people in their mid-20s up to their mid-30s, Ashraf is bringing them into the government sphere. And the economy is beginning to go up. Public opinions which have been taken by the Asia Foundation for many years. They're really, really good public opinion polls. It's beginning to show Afghans are beginning to feel more comfortable about the future of their country. The American University of Afghanistan is booming with two graduate schools now, administration and law. They had a bomb go off a couple of years ago in front of their main building. They rebuilt it, came back to work. Schools are both for men and women, are attracting millions of young Afghans. One very important thing is the government is looking for ways to import and export Afghan products without going through Pakistan, which has been problematic a number of times in history. A port in Iran has opened up, Chabahar is its name, and Afghanistan is now doing trade with the rest of the world through that port. Likewise, Afghanistan never had a railroad back in the 19th century. The then king didn't want a railroad because he was afraid they'd just bring in the enemy. But today they're seriously working on railroads that would connect Afghanistan with Europe and with China. So there are lots of things going on there. There's enough hope, I think, for us to be doing what we're doing, because I think we're supporting them at the right time. Just one thing about the Taliban and the war. I sort of feel about the Taliban a little bit, in one respect, a little bit like I used to think about the IRA, the Irish Revolutionary, whatever it was called, where every once in a while let off a bomb in London. That's sort of what Kabul is today. It's not every day that people are blowing bombs. It's a little bit like what the Irish opposition was doing back in those days. Every once in a while there'd be a bomb. I'm not saying that's a good thing, but almost everything you read about Afghanistan is bad news. A bomb here, a bomb there, how many people killed yesterday. I just want to give you a feeling that there's a lot happening that's positive in Afghanistan. How long is it going to take? I don't know. Is it worth taking? Yes, because the alternative is really bad. Let me go a little bit further west, because their border is Iran. And incidentally, the main language in Afghanistan and the Iranian language, Farsi, are very close to each other. So these are two cultures that have a language together. But in one respect, Iran is one of the most unique countries in the world. I would say that there are the three countries that have the oldest culture that is still with us are China, Egypt, and Iran. And the Iranians know this. They're extremely proud of a history that goes back to, remember, I don't know about you, but in school I was taught about how the Greeks fought off the Persians. But when you go to Iran, you immediately hear the story from the other side, and it's quite different. The Persia in those days was a major power. Today, Iran has a highly educated population. More women getting advanced degrees than men, actually. They have a terrible political system. And most, I think, of these younger people in Iran realize they have a terrible system. But they haven't been able to get out of it yet. Whether they will be anytime soon, I don't know. But I think we're making a terrible mistake if we turn Iran into an enemy. And and this is another thing, of course, that the Trump administration is doing. This nuclear weapon with Iran makes it impossible, if the Iranians follow it, to have a nuclear weapon for 10 to 15 years. Isn't that a good thing? And shouldn't we be sitting down now and seeing if we can, with the Iranians, and talking about how we can improve our relations? Yes, they're not doing great things with their Hezbollah friends in Lebanon, and they're not always with us on all these issues. They have reasons to be very unhappy about how they were treated by the United States decades ago, as we have also. Some remember they're taking our embassy over. We've got to get through that. This is an important country. It's the biggest country in that part of the world, and a proud, and I like to call it the France of the Middle East, because they look down upon all their neighbors with a long and with good reason. So Iran, a lot of people don't realize Iran is not an Arab country. You have to go a little further west to get into the Arab world, and some really interesting things are happening in the Arab world. Yes, our invasion of Iraq caused mayhem. We set off fires we had no idea we were going to set off. I mean, we really didn't. That Rumsfeld, Cheney, Bush outfit, I don't think it ever heard of a Shia or a Sunni. And this battle between these two major groups in the Islamic world goes back to the 17th century. And in that part of the world, people really remember history. And so the Iranians are the only Shiite country in that part of the world. Most of the Arabs are Sunnis, but you've got little pockets of Shiites in, for example, the president of Syria belongs to a Shia sect. So that this long battle between those two elements is a very key part of what is going on today. If you can track almost anything that's going on there to that particular problem. They haven't gotten very far towards settling it. The Catholics and the Protestants in Europe fought it out for 30 years in the 17th century. And nothing like that has happened in the Arab world. There's been some of you may have read an article by Tom Friedman in the New York Times about a week ago. He's just been in Saudi Arabia. And he was amazed and encouraged to come out of his conversations with the new leaders of Saudi Arabia, that maybe there is going to be some kind of a new Arab spring which will bring modernization to the Arab world, including in its politics. I hope he's right. I don't think she knows all about this because it's anthropological. I'm making an anthropological statement right now. Cultures don't change quickly. Am I okay?
That's fair enough.
But there are people in the Arab world who I think are seeing that fanatic Islamic groups are not good things for us to have. I hope that will be the case. It's not going to happen anytime soon, but we should be encouraging that in every possible way. Now, one of the things Mr. Trump really enjoys is, of course, being lauded wherever he goes. And boy, did the Saudis do a job on him. And I mean, a lot of people, I think, in the rest of the world have figured out that all you have to do be on the good side of Mr. Trump is to make him think you like him, or not even like him, love him. I love the pictures of the face of the president of China when he's with Trump. And, the Middle East is no longer as important to us as it was, say, 20 years ago, because we have oil. It used to be that the reason we were there in so many ways were because of oil. I think that one of the principal reasons we're still there now and will be staying there is our relationship with Israel. No American president is ever going to do anything that in the eyes of the Israelis is lessening Israeli security. You just take that for granted. That will never happen. And there are a lot of reasons dating back over now many decades why that's the fact. And that will always be a problem with us vis-a-vis trying to make friendships in the Arab world. One hopes that someday the Arabs and the Israelis will solve their problem. I'm all for that two-state solution. People keep trying it, and well, now Mr. Trump has his son-in-law going there to solve that problem, and good luck to him is all I can say. The Russians are taking advantage in that part of the world of our lessening our position there, our presence there. Winston Churchill and probably even Lord Horatio Nelson would be very unhappy to hear the Russians have a naval base in Syria. And just the other day, they made a new arrangement with the Egyptians whereby Russian military aircraft can refuel and stop at Egyptian airports. I don't think the Russians are. I don't think I know the Russians aren't thinking about the same values we have. But I'm wondering in this Trump administration whether they care much about the values we have. So it's going to be messy for a long time. There are signs of I'm going westward around the globe here. There are things going on in Europe which I find troublesome, which are somewhat like Trumpism. In Hungary and Poland, they are turning to a more autocratic type regime. Democracy is in danger in those two countries. Angela Merkel lost this last election, hasn't been able to form a new government. The problem are the people who are arguing strongly against any more immigration from the Middle East into Germany. It reminds you of something going on here, doesn't it? And this is not good. We, however, do not have a government which is standing up saying it's not good. I guess, Donna, what do I do? Shall I go straight to China?
I wanted to, it's sort of one little thing, then I think China is fine to be next. Apparently you and I wrote a piece together for the Press Democrat, and it was about the danger of Trump and Saudi cozying up to the Saudis in relation to Iran. And do you remember why we said that was a dangerous
Yes,
idea?
indeed, but this may be, if Friedman is right, this may be changing a little bit. But at that moment, Saudi Arabia was the country that was funding fanatic Islam all over the Middle East, all over the world for that matter. I mean, let's not forget who flew those planes on 9/11. So it seemed to us at that time that the idea of cozying up to the Saudis instead of cozying up to other people in that part of the world, including the Iranians, was a terrible mistake. So that's something to watch if we're going to see what's going on in that part of the world. Can we somehow or other get over this fear of Iran's activities and sit down. And it was done, of course, by the Secretary John Forbes Kelly. What was his name?
Which one?
The last Secretary of State. Kerry. Kerry and the Iranian foreign minister developed a real friendship for each other. That's the kind of friendship we need to. Is that the? Yeah.
Absolutely.
This book about China by Graham Allison asks the question whether the United States and China one day will go to war with each other. And he goes back, so it's a really interesting book because it goes back to Sparta and Athens. And Athens was the upcoming country, or in those days, state. And they were becoming as powerful as Sparta, and the Spartans were having trouble digesting this. And so eventually Sparta decided to go to war with Athens and keep them in their place. We have a very similar situation now between us and the Chinese. The Chinese are a rapidly rising state. Right now we don't look so good. Think of their growth of their economy, of their military, of their influence throughout Asia. Their ambition to be the greatest power in the world. How are we going to relate to that? How are we going to adjust to it? Allison points out that the British did a wonderful job of that. They allowed us to take over their position as the most powerful country in the world without any problems. And though there are many other things that make Britain and us and China not exactly parallel situations. But I think I think Graham Allison is absolutely correct that we've got to think about this. We've got to make sure we don't make enemies out of the Chinese. Once again, I come back to my very first theme of this talk is diplomacy is really important. You've got to sit down with people, no matter whether you like them or not. And it's true in our personal lives too, isn't it? The best way to overcome any problem is to sit down together and see if we can solve the problem. So that's my take on China. The South Korean thing, you want to say more about that?
Maybe one little thing about China and the.
Be careful when she says it's a little thing.
One little thing, one grandiose idea. Allison, one of the things he said that was interesting to me was that the American cultural response to international crises is often that, there's a pressure, a political pressure, and sometimes from the citizens, to act decisively when something happens. A crisis happens and everybody's, we've got to do something because that's an idea of American decisiveness and strength. And if we don't act right away, then everybody clamors and says, don't just stand there, get going. Whereas China takes the long view, and often the very long view, developing a strategy and a course that is very, very far ahead. So they're not as quick to react to crises. And he thinks that it would be nice if Americans might develop our own long view for thinking about a world in which China may, in fact, be the dominant power and work our way through that or with that in some kind of accommodating way. Which I think is a very interesting point that he makes.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. One word on North Korea.
Yeah.
I felt for many, many years that this was the most serious problem we were going to sooner or later face. We're getting very close to the point where they could send a nuclear weapon to the United States. Whether they would be stupid enough to do that, I don't know. We're banking on the fact that the leaders are rational, because of course if they would do something like that, we would wipe North Korea off the face of the earth. We don't want that to have to happen. The only influence on North Korea that is really meaningful to the North Koreans is the Chinese. And everything here depends on the Chinese, and it depends. We're by shaking our finger at the Chinese, or saying things to the press bad about the Chinese, what they're doing, and about North Korea. It won't help. It'll make it worse, because the Chinese are not going to publicly bow down to the United States and do what we want them to do. They are really genuinely worried about disorder in Korea. And we also, I think, many Americans have forgotten we actually fought a war with China in Korea. They remember that, and they don't want to have to do that again. So this is probably the most delicate, most important item at the moment on the international scene. Let me just talk for a moment about two last things. I think that the three greatest dangers for the human race, I'm really going big here now. Nuclear weapons are certainly one of the three. And enough powers, it could happen in India and Pakistan, it could happen with North Korea. We certainly don't want more countries like Iran to, incidentally, if Iran got nuclear weapons, the Saudis would get nuclear weapons, and tomorrow, some other Arab country would have, and we would have lost that game. Nuclear weapons can destroy the world. Mr. Perry says in this book that, in effect, if somebody blew up a nuclear weapon in New York Harbor someday, having stolen it from the Pakistanis' vault full of nuclear weapons, that might be the end of the modern world. It's a horrendous thought. There are other weapons out there too, which are beginning to be developed, which could destroy the human race. But nuclear weapons are the top of that right now. The second thing that comes into my mind when I think what can really damage the human race is climate change. And Trump's reaction to that, we're the only country in the world that has not subscribed to the Paris Agreement. And the Paris Agreement doesn't begin to solve the problem. And every time I fly in or out of San Francisco Airport, I always have the map in front of me, because I just kind of like to know where I am. And it finally settles down on the tarmac in the SFO. And you know what it says? It says either 1 foot or 2 feet or 3 feet or 4 feet. By 50 to 100 years from now, what's that airport going to look like? What's the world going to look like? What happens to low-lying cities and islands all over the world? This is an urgent problem, and and to have the government of the United States of America, one of the biggest polluters in the world, back away from the program. We do have in this state, in our governor, somebody who cares. And it would be nice. Some days I think California should become a separate state, because we seem to be doing things a lot better than our federal government is.
Would we build a wall?
Oh yeah, I forgot that. Well, what we're doing is we're appealing to our base. But I'll just say one more thing about this guy. He's a terrible human being.
Mr. Ambassador.
Yeah, ambassadors don't usually speak that way, but I don't work for him. I had some actually quite good. I started with Truman and finished with who did I finish with? Carter, I guess. And
What's the third factor?
okay, ready?
Yeah.
Too many people.
Yeah.
Too many people, and this results in all kinds of bad behavior, of hatreds because your neighbors are different from you. Sometimes wars. It is causing huge movements of populations from poor states to rich states. This is Angela Merkel's problem. It's something that our administration is not coming to grips with. And are we still the country that welcomes foreigners? Does the language on the Statue of Liberty still pertain? Not with this administration. We've got to resolve that problem. Then I want to talk a little bit about us, and then I'll conclude. We need to be doing a lot of things in our country. I just had a wonderful trip to Australia. I must have driven 1,000 miles on Australian roads, and I didn't see one pothole. Take a look at our infrastructure, our airports, our railroads. I mean, how many fast-track railroads does China have? We don't have any. Wouldn't it be nice not to have to go to SFO, go through all that security stuff, baggage problems, get on an airplane? Why not just jump on a plane and on a train and ride down to LA in 3 or 4 hours, something like that? We need to do a lot of things about our country. We need to look at racism. We need to look at, I'm so pleased this whole business of sexual harassment is coming to the surface here. My God, that's been going on forever in this country. I hope that some progress will be made on that issue. I mentioned immigration, and sitting where I am right now on this stage with this behind me, our education. What has happened to education that teaches people about how government and politics work? How many of the people who voted for Trump knew nothing whatsoever about how things are done in the government in Washington? How many of our kids are going through school without the education that a citizen needs? I was a very lucky man. I grew up in the Boston area, and it was such that in the 6th grade, I learned about British history. I could tell you the names of all the kings and queens of England. This is the connection of Boston with England in the 1940s. I had to be in the 7th grade before I had American history. And I can still to this day remember the name. His name was Mr. Harlow. I have no idea what his first name was. He stood before the blackboard the first day of class, and he wrote one word on the backboard, and that word was tolerance. And he said, this is going to be the theme you're going to get from me, you 7th graders, about what we Americans have to remember is that we have to be tolerant of all the different people we live within our country and in this world. Now, I thought that was a pretty good start. I've never forgotten it. So the last thing I could mention others, the last thing that we have to do is to fix the way we have elections. We are the most corrupt democracy in the world. And just in these recent weeks where you hear some Republican doesn't feel he can vote such and such a way because his donors don't like that. Money runs this country. It runs our politics. I'd like to hear you, Lynn, on this. I'm sure you'll agree with me. This is outrageous. It is turning us into the country that none of us want it to be. So all these other problems in the world that we are facing, I don't think we can face them until we clean up our own show.
That's nice.
So I'll stop there.
We go for questions now? Maybe we have
Oh, why not?
10 minutes of questions?
No, we have time for questions.
Can I respond to his question? Okay. Hi. I want to respond to money and politics. I am part of a new national organization called the Reformers, and it's issue 1. We are referring to ourselves. And the issue is, and it's bipartisan, past members of the House, the Senate, governors and mayors, and it's 60% Democrat, 50%, 40% Republican, but more and more Republicans are joining this group. It has to be bipartisan. The issue is getting money out of politics.
Mr. Ambassador, thank you for your information about Afghanistan. You have a very long experience and knowledge about the Middle East in Afghanistan. I have only one kind of question. It is 16 years United States and United States allies are in Afghanistan. And this is the longest war in Afghanistan. You know, in 16 years, still we have corruption in Afghanistan. Still Afghanistan is the field of opium. Still Afghanistan become a diversity between the nationality in Afghanistan. Hazara, Uzbek, Tajik, Pashtun. And still a lot of country wants to get power in Afghanistan. And pushing to get more power, you talk about Iran. One is Iran. Another is Pakistan. Also, Russia and Arabic countries. What is the solution for this?
I'm so
how
glad.
long more the Afghan people wants to be in the war and in terrible time they have?
I'm so glad you raised. Yeah,
Still
go
the
ahead.
government of Afghanistan is very weak, in my opinion, because creation of both power in Afghanistan. One is president, another is executive. One is the part of the big parties, Northern Alliance.
Sir,
Another
what
is Ashraf Ghani. He doesn't have any power.
Can you give me a precise question? What would you like me to?
Precise question is what is the solution of all of this problem?
Well, I'm really glad because I neglected to mention Pakistan. Pakistan is the problem when it comes to the war in Afghanistan. And we have had a on-again, off-again relationship with Pakistan over many years. Right now, I said earlier that one of the things the Trump administration seems to be doing right is Afghanistan. I think it's also doing right with Pakistan. It is telling the Pakistanis that if they don't stop these, ability of the Taliban and other such groups to wrest and re-equip themselves in Pakistan, if they're going to continue supporting these people, we're going to cut their aid back significantly. And actually, the first aid program of this, I guess, this administration for Pakistan has already been half has already been held back, waiting to see what the Pakistanis will do about these terrorists. I really do believe that if the Taliban and other groups continue to have a safe harbor inside Pakistan, this war is going to be very hard to stop this war. I think the additional troops that have gone in there, I think we're up to about 14,000 American troops and quite a few NATO troops as well. I think we have the equipment, and we're gradually giving the Afghan armed forces the equipment to hit these people hard from the air, and there are more drone attacks just in the last couple of weeks. It may come to the point where the Taliban will say, we've had enough, let's sit down at the conference table, let's talk. That's the game at the moment. Is it a terrible thing? And a lot of this is funded by opium. The Taliban are funded by the opium trade. And so they're, you know, I'm so glad I'm not president of Afghanistan. It is the difficulties of moving it ahead in all the directions it has to go in are just tremendous. I have great admiration for President Ghani doing what he's doing, and I was very glad that this is one thing the Trump administration seems to agree with me on. So thank you for raising very important issues.
Since the Trump administration's been in power, there's been no criticism of either Putin or Russia, and our foreign policy seems right out of their playbook designed to divorce us from our traditional allies. What do you think is going on with Trump and Russia and Putin? Is it they got something on him? Is he a plant? Is he a traitor? What's going on?
I think we're getting very close to a point where the President of the United States may be indicted. If he's done something criminal, I hope that happens. I think I'm very pleased with the way Mr. Mueller is going ahead with this. He's really doing a good job, I think. And you saw he got Mr. Flynn turned around to save his own skin. And so as far as our relations with Russia is concerned, you know, I'm not really, the Cold War with Russia is over. I'm not really worried about how we handle Putin. Once again, I think we sit down and talk, but we also continue to make it harder for him to do things against us by slapping trade issues at his face and so forth and so on. But let's Mueller do his thing. I'm optimistic he's going to do it right. And if Trump is not personally involved, he's not personally involved. But I think Mueller is going to find out.
Thanks, that's a good question, Neil. Ted, it's great to listen to you because I've known you for years and have never really listened to you talk business or the business that you're in, so thank you. But I just want to bring up one point as far as the corruption in finances in politics, just so people really understand it's not just at the federal level. It's at all levels of government, and it's right at the local level also, and we could point to that in our own community. And so getting public funds in politics is very important so we can keep corporations out. But thanks for the lecture today.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned that because I've had experience with it in Sonoma County.
We have one more question over here.
I don't mind if you have 5 more questions.
Okay,
but
well, do it to the crowd. And then we're going to have Donna tie it all up with her. Donna's going to say the last word.
Fine,
I
fine.
think you should, okay.
Thank you for your time here. I have a question, speaking of literacy. What do you recommend as sources, publications for learning about good, solid international news?
I'm sorry, I didn't get that.
International news, good media sources for international news.
Yeah, I think we have a real problem in this whole business of news. I think the Facebook and these other ways of getting news are very dangerous weapons, and I think they had an effect on the 2016 election campaign, including perhaps what the Russians fed Facebook, anti-Hillary stuff. And I don't quite see how they are going to be able to regulate without looking as though it's censorship. And so this is a huge, huge issue. As for the regular media, I think they got their mind all the time on their bottom line. And one of the first things they cut is international coverage. I'm really impressed with NPR and PBS. Yeah, they seem to have people all over the world. They pop up, and you might not hear from somebody from Rome in a long time, and then I get that lady with that wonderful accent. But I think this is one of our weaknesses right now. Anybody over here?
Couple of questions over here.
So we will do, this will be the second of the 5.
One here and one here.
Yes, I'd like to get back to a long view question. It occurs to me that back on climate change, that our military has a huge stake in how they view the rising seas in the world. And that never seems to come up in any of the discussions. And don't you think that our military has to be tied in pretty carefully to what's happening climate-wise and what that does to the sea levels? And if so, with our current administration seeming to be very military-oriented, having brought in generals into the cabinet, why they don't seem to tumble to how important it is for the military to understand climate change and global warming. Do you have a thought on that?
Not really, because I don't know what the military is doing that is damaging climate in major ways. We're not like the North Koreans testing nuclear weapons. So I'm going to pass on that aspect of it, but I do want to say something about the military in general, because Trump seems to rely very heavily on the military. 2 things. One is this is a very educated military. If you get to the top of the pile in any one of the armed services, you will have had education as you've gone up the ladder in some of the best schools in America, including about international relations. I happen to have a granddaughter who is a graduate of the Air Force Academy, and her first assignment after finishing her 4 years at the Academy was 2 years at the Kennedy School to learn about public administration. And she's now about to become a major in the United States Air Force. And she continues being sent off for this course and that course and something. So I don't know what the military is doing about climate change. Apparently Donna does.
No, I don't know if this quite addresses your question, but I do know that the Pentagon does have contingency plans in case various continents and so forth send refugees from usually south to north. The Pentagon takes climate change seriously, and it sees it typically or understandably in terms of a threat. I mean, so if climate change can be seen as a threat, for example, to North America, if agricultural lands in Africa and other parts of the world are drying up and refugees are coming in the direction of the north, they have all kinds of scenarios in which it's not necessarily a very pleasant scenario, but they're seeing it as a threat issue. And so there are contingency plans for handling masses of refugees moving from one part of the world to the other, or one part of the hemisphere to the other. So, I mean, they're certainly aware of the implications of climate change. I do know that, what happened in Rwanda, and even in the beginning of the Syrian situation, the agricultural lands in the Rwanda case were drying up. People couldn't work in the farms anymore in the rural areas, and they sort of came en masse into the cities. The cities had no way of handling them, no system in place to handle such a large amount of people coming in, and that then bred discrimination and unemployment and violence and so forth. And then that's one of the things that played into the beginning of the Syrian war in any event. And there are other places in the world where that has happened. And so that's one of the reasons why the Pentagon is interested in these kinds of issues.
Thank you for your comprehensive overview of the mess we're in.
Of the what?
Of the mess we're in.
Oh, well, yeah.
And
Yeah.
I'm sure you know that our founders warned us avoid foreign entanglements.
Yeah.
And do not in search of monsters abroad to go, like John Quincy Adams to some effect, paraphrasing. And yet that's exactly what we do. We do that everywhere, and nowhere more so than with the country of Israel. Now, you made a statement to the effect that no president would risk alienating the depth of our relationship with Israel. And that, to me, seems totally clear with the incumbent whose son who gave up his bed to let Bibi Netanyahu sleep in it in 1999 when Bibi was visiting Charles. So my point is this. The Arab League and the Palestinians have both said that the shift of the capital from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem will eviscerate the peace process, a phrase I find totally, anyway, you get my point. Long and short of it is, the Congresswoman has told us that you can prognosticate. I will let you off the hook to the extent that I don't expect you to be able to predict. But the Arab League and the Palestinians are saying there will be no more peace process if Israel and Trump allows the capital, the embassy, to be placed in Jerusalem.
Thank you. I agree with that. I think this is really, really stupid and dangerous. How would you like to be an officer in the American embassy named the Arab country when that happens? I mean, you talk about the ravaging of some of our embassies over the years in that part of the world. I mean, my successor in Afghanistan was assassinated. And what happened to the ambassador in Libya, I mean, this is anti-Americanism, yes, would flare up again, and there's absolutely no reason to do it.
But this issue goes beyond Trump. By your own admission, it's about American foreign policy and our marriage to Israel. That's the 51st state, in my opinion.
Yeah, well, I guess what's in their heads is that they're thinking that maybe they'll get more Jewish votes in the next election. I'm not sure that's true at all. I think the American Jewish community is smarter than that, and they've put up with this for many, many years. So why is Trump bringing it up now? He's bringing it up here because the only reason he could be bringing it up is he thinks he's going to get more votes.
It's about demonizing Iran.
Yeah, well, that too, and
Paul. Yeah.
Sure.
Okay.
But I do want to just say one more thing. There have been times where we've disagreed strongly with what the Israelis are doing or we're doing. And I hope we will continue to do that. I mean, the issue of settlements is something that is absolutely necessary for us to, yeah. So, but all I'm saying is you'll never see an American president, at least I don't think you'll ever see, unless you're maybe 2 years old, which I don't think you are, I don't think presidents will do anything to weaken Israeli security, just because they won't do it. I mean, the State Department was against Truman recognizing Israel way back when. And so it's hard to make foreign policy in America, in the United States, for a whole lot of reasons. But one of them is you'll always find an ethnic group that is important in the next election that you've got to be careful of. You remember Jerry Ford didn't know that Poland was part of the Soviet Empire, and the Poles from Detroit to Chicago all voted for Carter.
Okay, excuse me, sir.
Yeah.
We have time for one more question, and then Donna's going to say the last word here.
Good. Donna.
And then we're running a little late. So
I know how hard this is, Ted. I want to thank you for taking a few extra questions. Lynn, thank you for the introductions. And Donna, you invited much of our neighborhood here. But personally, I want to say, Ted, thank you for all the work that you've done in your career.
yeah.
And we also owe you a debt of gratitude for you and Patty for producing Wendy Elliott at the Sonoma Land Trust. So this has been a wonderful day, and Donna, thank you for inviting us and being willing to be the moderator. We've learned a lot now. There's a young fellow in the front seat named Ben, and I'm wondering what you would suggest by way of advice to someone of his age who's already expressed his favorite class is world history.
You know, I didn't quite.
I had trouble hearing that.
Yeah, thank you.
What-
He had trouble hearing you.
There's a fellow named Ben in the front seat, right in front of you. Wonderful Ben. Wave your hand there, Ben. And so, Ted, his favorite class subject is world history. What advice do you have for him?
I'm sorry. I'm still not quite getting it.
What class? What other classes? He really likes world history.
Oh, are you setting me up?
Beyond
You're setting me up to. I'm so sorry. I'm slow to catch that.
Anthropologist?
What about cultural anthropology as an idea? Actually, we could have like a plug here for that. A canon of both the diplomatic world and the world of cultural anthropology is, of course, investing and understanding other countries, other cultures, and looking at them, trying to understand them in their own terms. And I think, it was actually James Baldwin who made a comment that I think speaks to this beautifully. He said, speaking of humanity, if we made the effort to understand ourselves better, we've got a chance at damaging ourselves less. Those are my last words.
Okay. Thank you, everybody, for coming. We got a great lecture speaker series going on next year.